It's Tuesday, the 18th of January, and effective midnight tonight, over 80 airports across the nation are effectively not authorized to allow pilots to fly Category 2 and Category 3 instrument approaches into those airports due to possible interference from the 5G wireless rollout, effectively limiting the weather capability of these airports to 1/2 mile visibility. If the weather drops to less than 1/2 mile, these airports will not be authorized to allow those aircraft to land, which could potentially cause a huge backup in air traffic across the country. There's nothing like putting off your homework and your research until the last moment to turn a problem into a major national crisis. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel. Let's get into this. I first broke down this problem back in November on this channel about the possible interference between the new 5G wireless rollout and aviation, specifically the radio or radar altimeters in the airplane. The radio or radar altimeters in the airplane is what gives us the capability to do auto land approaches in very low visibility conditions. It will give us the very critical, very accurate altitude information we need to properly align and flare the aircraft and touch it down perfectly all by itself and come to a complete stop on centerline without the pilot touching the controls. These radio altimeters were designed and authorized by the FAA and industry years ago to operate in a narrow band of frequencies with no interfering neighbors near this frequency band. Until recently, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, sold for billions of dollars some frequency bands very close to the radio frequency that the radio altimeters operate in. The radio altimeter only uses about 1 watt of power. And to this date, nobody has completed an exhaustive study to determine how resistant to frequency interference these radio altimeters are. So to get a better idea of where we stand today, how we got to this crisis point, we got to look at the major players. First, you've got the 5G wireless telecom community, which wants to expand to the 5G network. In order to do that, they need increased bandwidth. They need an increased number of frequencies. The power that the systems uses is limited already. So in order to get faster internet service, they need more bandwidth, more frequencies. Now, as these frequencies begin to impinge upon that of aviation operations, we have the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, which fundamentally does not have the manpower or technical capability or funding to research thoroughly the potential problems of interference between the 5G and the radio altimeters. There is, however, an advisory committee of volunteers, the RTCA, the Radio Technical Commission for Aeronautics. These are the engineers, the electrical engineers, that are sticking around in a voluntary capacity to help guide the FAA on matters such as this. Now, the RTCA did do some preliminary research on this and did conclude that yes, in fact, there may be a problem with interference between 5G and radar and radio altimeters in the aviation industry. The telecom industry immediately rejected the RTCA report, saying it was insufficient and inconclusive, but the telecom industry offered no substantial evidence of their own that would prove that this interference problem would not be a problem. The telecom industry does not fundamentally understand how radio and radar altimeters in aircraft were designed or how they operate. So in response to growing public pressure, the FAA back in December issued an airworthiness directive to aircraft operators, and we'll go inside and take a look at it, that tell operators that if a particular airport instrument approach is NOTAM closed due to possible 5G interference, you cannot fly that instrument approach. And effective midnight tonight, there's going to be NOTAMs, notices to airmen, that effectively shut down the use at over 80 airports, those instrument approaches that would require the use of the radio or radar altimeter. So, in effect, if the weather is less than Category 1 ILS minimums, in other words, less than 1/2 mile visibility, the metal is not going to move. And this can potentially cause huge backups across the entire country because there's so many aircraft flying at one time across the country. Once one airport is impacted, that backs up across the entire country. And airline CEOs are in the news this morning explaining how this can cost the airline industry potentially millions of dollars in lost revenue. Let's go inside and take a look at these NOTAMs and airworthiness directives. Okay, here's the airworthiness directive that fundamentally changes the limitations to transport and commuter category airplanes that have radio or radar altimeters on board. The FAA is adopting a new AD to all transport and commuter category aircraft equipped with a radio, also known as radio altimeter, a radar altimeter. This AD was prompted by a determination that radio altimeters cannot be relied upon to perform their intended function if they experience interference from wireless broadband operations in the 3.7 to 3.98 gigahertz frequency band. That's the new 5G C-band. This AD requires revising the limitations section. That's one of the most important sections of the entire manual of your aircraft, of the existing aircraft manual to incorporate limitations prohibiting certain operations requiring radio altimeter data when in the presence of 5G C-band interference as identified by a NOTAM, a notice to airmen. And that's what's happening today as these NOTAMs are coming out for all of these different airports. And here's the airworthiness directive as shown in all of our manuals now, including in my Boeing 777 manual, and it says, when operating in U.S. airspace, the following operations requiring radio altimeters are prohibited in the presence of 5G C-band broadband interference as identified by NOTAM, and the NOTAMs will be issued to state the specific airports where the radio altimeter is unreliable due to the presence of the 5G C-band wireless broadband interference. And here's the prohibited operations if these airports are NOTAMed. Special Authorization Category 1, Special Authorization Category 2, Category 2 and Category 3 approaches, RNAV RNP approaches with authorization required, automatic landing operations. By the way, these aircraft need to have periodic, about every 90 days, you got to perform a auto land on the airplane, regardless of the weather, just to keep the system operational and logged that it is correctly operating. That's going to cause a backup there too. You can't even do a practice auto land approach if this NOTAM is in effect. Also, manual flight guided control systems, including heads-up display, that's how the 737 performs these approaches, and the use of enhanced vision systems to touch down under the FARs. Hang on, breaking news. Just as I was getting this report out, the bluff has been called, and the Telecoms, the 5G, will not deploy near airports. The NOTAMs that I'm looking for are now being lifted for all these various airports. But I did get a snapshot of the NOTAM before it was rescinded. And here's what it looked like for Sacramento Airport, our local airport, which does frequently go down for weather below a half mile. But earlier today it said that effectively at 5Z, that was going to be 9 o'clock tonight, local time, the Special Authorization Category 1 approach, Category 2, and Category 3 approaches were all NA, not authorized, unless you have an alternate method of compliance with the airworthiness directive that we just talked about. Also, all radio altimeter, SMF radio altimeter unreliable, auto land, heads-up display to touchdown, enhanced flight vision systems to touchdown, helicopter operations requiring radio altimeter data to include hover and autopilot, not authorized unless you had a alternative method of compliance with the airworthiness directive that we just mentioned. So, crisis averted while we're putting this report together. This is exactly what we're looking for, is we're looking for at least a 2-mile buffer of this 5G technology from the final approach course on these airports that have the Category 2 and Category 3 instrument approach procedures in place. Wow. Talk about crisis by management. There's got to be a better way to do this. Thanks so much for your support of this channel, especially over on Patreon that make this content possible. We'll see you here.